So today I thought I would talk to you about and rank all of the books that I read for my English degree that I did in France because I'm French. If you couldn't hear, I'm not gonna lie. At this point, it's been quite a while since I've graduated, but I came across those books while I was cleaning, and I don't know, they just brought back so many memories. And I felt like it could be, I don't know, maybe interesting for you to see what kind of books they choose in our curriculum. Sorry, the kind of books that we read when you do an English degree in university in France, compared to a degree in like an English speaking country. I will say though, the difference is that my degree was not like specifically about literature. It was a big part of it, but that's not all we studied. We also studied a lot of history, a lot of like politics, linguistics, translations, all that kind of stuff. But literature was a big part of it. So we read quite a few books, and yeah, I wanted to rank them because I think that some of them are a little bit. I don't know if I could say that they're underrated because I mean they're classics. So like, can a classic be underrated? I don't really know, but I don't see a lot of people like on BookTube and BookTok and just like on the internet in general. Even people who talk a lot about classics, I don't really see them talk about some of them much. And there are others that I see a lot of people talk about, and I personally am not a big fan. And so I also wanted to talk about that. So the last book, technically, on my list, but the first one that I'm going to talk about is Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. This book is. There's a reason why it's last on my list. It's just not very good, is it? It's just it's just not great. Honestly, even the writing was not the best. I don't really know. I feel like everyone has an idea of what the book is about without like actually knowing what the book is really about. And so a lot of people have this idea of what the book is about based on like you know stuff you hear, like movies and the collective mind. Basically, you have this idea that Robinson Crusoe is this guy that gets stranded on a deserted island, and he makes friends, and he tries to like build a ship to get away, and he tries to survive and stuff like that, and it's basically like kind of an adventure story. And when you actually read it, it's kind of like that. But first of all, if you think that it's an adventure story, like you're gonna be quite disappointed because it's actually like, honestly, it's actually quite boring. To be fair, it is very old. I think it's considered the first English novel, and it was written in like I could be wrong about that, but I think it was written in the 16th or 17th century, somewhere like that. So it is very, very old, and you can tell when you read it. And the main thing that makes you be able to tell that it's quite old, and the main thing that I feel like is lost, has been lost in time, that people don't really know about the book, is that it's actually like a very imperialist, pro-colonialism story. This book is basically about a guy that, yes, gets stranded on an island, but when he meets the natives of the island, first of all, the natives are very much like, they're very much described as these savages, who are barbarians, and they kill the poor white people that end up on the island, and they're uncivilized, and all that kind of stuff. And the only native that, I was gonna say he befriends, but honestly, he doesn't even befriend him. He basically becomes his servant, which is, another thing. It's an old book. Like definitely, uh, it definitely shows. It's a product of its time. It's very much that. And yeah, but the thing is, there are products of their time that, well, yes, there are things about them that didn't age well because, like I said, they're a product of their time, and so like morals have changed. But there's still something to take away from them. I feel like they can still be good even if they're a product of their time. But this with this book, I don't think it's the case. Like I honestly don't think you're missing a lot if you don't read it. But I mean, who am I to say that? Obviously, I don't have the credentials to to say whether like a classic is worth its title, or like whether you should read it or not. Obviously, this is just my opinion. Personally, I would say you wouldn't miss much if you skipped it. But, who am I to say that? My second to least favorite is gonna be quite a controversial one. I know this book is very, very popular. I'm not gonna say that I don't understand why it is popular, because I do understand. It's just that I don't agree with it. And this book is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I just I'm just not much of a fan of this book, you know? I've been trying I tried to read this book 3 times actually. The first time I tried to read it, I was 14 years old. Then I tried to read it a second time a couple years later. I still couldn't get into it. And then I have finally had to read it because, it was on my curriculum for my degree. And so I did read it. And I very much struggled. I don't know what it is about this book. I don't know if it's the writing, just the way it's so descriptive. But usually I don't know. Usually I like some books that are descriptive, but there's something about this that was just so boring to me. I can't explain it. I'm not a fan of it. I've never been a fan. I understand why it's so beloved, because when you look at the themes, I didn't even say what this book is about. I just realized. I feel like most people know what Wuthering Heights is about, but if you don't know, it's about this guy who's called Heathcliff. Heathcliff. Wait, yeah, Heathcliff, and he's found by this benevolent man when he's only a child, because he's an orphan, and he gets taken under his wig. His wig. This has been a long day, okay? He's taken under his wing, and he gets into like this family, but there are a lot of people who are a lot of people in this family who are very mean to him because of his condition, because of the fact that he's an orphan, and they're just very mean to him. And so he grows up to take revenge on these people, and essentially this is um what is it called, a corruption story of someone who becomes just as bad as the people who he hates. And so the themes are very interesting, and honestly, based on the kind of books that I like, I feel like I should like this. But again, like I said, I found this so painfully boring. I don't know what it is about it. I just can't get into it. So yeah, this is Wuthering Heights. I know a lot of people love it, probably for good reason, but personally, it's just not my thing. It's just not for me. I don't like it. Then the next book on this list, I'm assuming not a lot of people are probably gonna know about this book. It's called Under Milkwood by Dylan Thomas. It's a Welsh play, and how do I describe what this book is about? Honestly, it's not about much. That's the thing. It's basically a play about a bunch of Welsh people who are inhabitants of this small Welsh town. And that's basically all this play is about. It's about these people just, having conversations between them, a bunch of random conversations. There's not really a linear story, there's not really a narrative or anything like that. It's basically supposed to be like a representation of a typical day in a small Welsh town. And yeah, that's what the book is about. And I don't know, like it's not awful, but personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this style. First of all, I'm not the biggest fan in general of plays, because personally, I don't really like to read plays. I've always said that I prefer to see a play be performed rather than read it, and it's especially true with this one, because I feel like phonetically it does things that are very interesting, and like when you read it aloud, and actually if you want to read this, I would strongly advise you to read it aloud rather than like read it in your head, because when you read it aloud, you do take things out of it than you wouldn't if you just read it normally in your head. But even more so, I would advise you to see it be performed, or like find a video or something if you can, because like the writing of it is meant to be said aloud. And yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about it. It's just, it's not awful, but it's not my thing. And I don't think it's that great either. So yeah. Then we have something completely different. It's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, which is the story of Huck Finn, who tries to escape because of his abusive father, and also because he's sick of societal conventions. Basically, he wants to basically do what he wants to do. He doesn't want to go to school and do things that society wants you to do. So that's why he runs away. And while he runs away, he comes across this slave who is a runaway who's called Jim. And this entire book is basically about his relationship with 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 this man, with this slave who is running away, because Huck Finn has always been taught that, slavery was morally good and that slaves who run away are morally bad. And so basically, he spends the whole story trying to decide whether to snitch on him or to help him escape. It's not bad. Personally, I kind of struggled actually to read this. I don't know if it's because English is not my first language, regardless of the fact that I studied it. While I was reading it during my degree, I struggled a lot actually reading it. Mostly because of the way Mark Twain writes dialogues. If you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about. The way he writes, especially like Jim talking, because like some of his characters have specific accents and vernacular, and so Mark Twain makes a point to writing the dialogue the way it's supposed to be heard, and I'm sure that's great um, in terms of like immersion. But to read, it's something that I struggle with so much every time, and it's not just with this book. Every time I come across an author that does that, it just makes it so much harder for me to understand, and it makes it just so much more tedious. And that's basically what happened with this book. It was just a very tedious book to read. I did actually I enjoyed studying it, but in terms of just reading it, I struggled a lot, and that's why it's solo on my list, basically. The next book on this list is the only Shakespeare play that we read in its entirety. We did study other Shakespeare plays, but we basically only studied like excerpts from them. But this was the only play that we read in its entirety, and it's Twelfth Night by Shakespeare. From what I remember, this play is about. First of all, it's a comedy. It's like a lot of mistaken identities, which I feel like Shakespeare likes a lot. It's about this nobleman, who is in love with this woman, but she doesn't reciprocate his feelings because her brother died recently. And then alongside that, you have a woman and her brother who get stranded on the place where they live. And for some reason, I can't remember why, but for some reason, the woman decides to like get disguised as a man, and she starts to work for the main male character, and she falls in love with him. But the woman that this man loves ends up falling in love with her, because she thinks that she's a man because she's disguised as a man, and so she falls in love with her. And there's a whole thing about that. There's a lot of like I said, mistaken identities, um, and so it's a lot about that. And it's okay, it's not my favorite. It's far from being my favorite Shakespeare play. I think I probably tend to prefer his tragedies, at least from what I've read. But at least I remember that it was actually quite funny in some aspects. Also, the ending, I do remember that. The ending was not the best. It was kind of convenient. Yeah, it wasn't the best. It was just very convenient and like, okay, I guess. And yeah, that's 12th Night. Then another play, but completely different this time, is Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller. So Death of a Salesman is about this guy in his 60s, I believe, who is a salesman, and he's at the end of his career and he's honestly losing it a bit. And this play is about, it's about that. It's about this guy just, you know, losing his mind, just being very much underappreciated in his job. It's basically about the meaningless nature of corporate jobs in in a capitalist society, and it's just very depressing. Especially, I feel like, especially if you're in that time in your life where you're just, starting to work, you're starting like, corporate jobs. Reading this will just it will depress you so bad. It's also about generally his whole family. It's also mostly about his other son, who is very lost in life and just does a bunch of like meaningless jobs because he doesn't know what to do with his life. And his dad is very critical of that, because he clearly had all these aspirations for himself and all these ambitions, but being a salesman, he never quite accomplished what he wanted to do. And so basically, he projects a lot of it on his son, and so he's very disappointed that his son is not accomplishing more than he ever did. And so it's basically about that. It's just a whole lot of depressing stuff, and a whole lot of like, being disappointed in your life, and just not accomplishing what you wanted to do. And it's just very depressing. It is very well written, I will say that, and I think it does accomplish what it sets out to do very well, and it is well written. But yeah, like I said, very depressing. Then another play, like I said, a play was never gonna be in my top favorite books that I read, because I'm just not a fan of plays. But this was the play that I liked the most out of all the ones that we studied and that we read. It's a streetcar named Desire by Tennessee Williams. It's about this woman, Blanche, who she had a plantation and she basically lost it, and she has nothing else to do, and she has like nothing else to her name. She's not married, she doesn't have a family. So she pays visit to her sister, Stella. I think it's her little sister, I think. Not that it matters, but yeah, basically she pays her visit to her sister, who is married and who is pregnant, and her husband is a piece of shit. Let me tell you, whoo, this man, Stanley. Stanley and Blanche, they do not get along very well. Not at all, even. Mostly because Blanche is quite an eccentric character. She's not, especially for the time, she's not your typical woman who is who's very quiet and submissive and stuff like that. And a man like Stanley, who's kind of a macho and is honestly like even sometimes abusive towards his wife. He does not like that very much, and obviously Blanche doesn't like him because he's an asshole and because he's abusive towards her sister. So obviously she doesn't like him, and so they butt head a lot. And this story is also very depressing, especially the ending. I feel like it's a very good representation of basically like the way women were treated at the time, and honestly still to this day. Like, and that's what makes it truly so depressing, is that honestly a lot of the ideas that characters hold in this book, and a lot of things that happen, are things that still happen today, are things that like they're like ideas that some people still hold to this day about women and what they're supposed to do, and what they're not supposed to do. And it's honestly very depressing. It is a good play, and it does, again, Similarly to Death of a Salesman, I feel like while it is depressing, it does accomplish what it sets out to do very, very well. But I have to warn you, like it is very tragic and depressing. So you've been warned. But it's I would say it's quite good. Then the only French book that I have on this list, actually, because we did have a course in French. It was a course about mythology and religion. And so the book that we studied for that was Metamorphosis by Ovid, which is basically a collection of poems that are based on like myths around the theme of metamorphosis and change and all that kind of stuff. I didn't read the entirety of the book. There we studied specific poems, I remember. So I didn't read all of it. But the ones that I did read, I remember really liking. I feel like generally, if you like mythology, if you like myths, you will probably really like this. But it is quite tedious. It is quite dense. It's not the easiest thing to read, but it is like the writing is very, very good, and the myths are interesting. I don't know. I don't really have much else to say about it. It's if you like mythology, you will probably like this. I did enjoy it a lot, and I especially really enjoyed studying it. So yeah, I would recommend it. Then the next thing on this list is The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. The Sherlock Holmes story. It's in this bundle, this collection of all the Sherlock Holmes story that I still have not read. I purposefully, this is ridiculous. I purposefully bought this edition to have the complete Sherlock Holmes in it so that I would eventually like read all of the Sherlock Holmes story. When I tell you that I've not read a single other story in this book ever since I read The Hound of the Baskervilles for my degree, like this is ridiculous. But this is very much on brand for me to do that. Yeah, so anyway, we read and studied The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle, which is a story about this family that lives in this town where everyone thinks that this specific family, the Baskervilles, they think they are cursed because there is this seemingly ghostly hound that you know roam the land and supposedly kill the people from this family. And so that's where the myth comes from. But obviously, Sherlock being Sherlock, he's like, that sounds like bullshit. And so he's called to resolve this case. And he does. It's a good whodunit. It's a good story. It's a good crime story. I'm not big on crime stories. I haven't read that many, but I do feel like, from what I remember, this was a good one. Like I said, I don't read a lot of crime stories, so I don't know like how much it means that I couldn't guess like what was the solution. But I didn't. I was quite taken by surprise by the ending. And so, yeah, I think it was pretty good. I will say, though, I did watch the show, the BBC show, Sherlock. And so I feel like that I had this idea. I watched the show before I read the story. And I feel like I had this idea of the character of Sherlock in my head, who is already not super likable, I feel like, in the show. But oh my god, if you've never read the stories, like the actual stories, Sherlock is not he's not a likable character at all. That's probably the thing that surprised me the most, is how unlikable Sherlock is as a character. He is a pretty fascinating character, and he is like very, very like smart and clever. Obviously, that's his whole thing. But oh my god, he's so unlikable. I also feel like the Sherlock Holmes stories, or at least the only one that I read, uh, they are quite readable. And I feel like if you're not used to reading a lot of classics, if you want to get into classics and you don't really know where to start, I feel like this is probably a good start, because it is quite readable, and it's not super tedious or difficult to understand or anything like that. The writing is pretty accessible, so I would definitely recommend. Maybe if you want to start with classics, start with something like this. So now we're starting with the books that I genuinely really liked. And so the first one on this list, it's Waiting for the Barbarians by J.M. Coetzee. This is a South African story. This is the story of this unnamed narrator who is only called the Magistrate, who works for this unnamed empire. And yeah, he works for this unnamed empire that awaits the arrival, or like the attack of so-called barbarians that we are supposed to understand are representative of South Africans, like original South Africans. And it's basically about the paranoia that these people that live there have about these barbarians attacking, which, spoiler alert, like they never do. So the Magistrate, who's been working for this unnamed empire that we're supposed to understand is like the state of apartheid in South Africa, or like it's representative of that, because we know that J.M. Coetzee is a South African author and has always been like very vocal about him being against the apartheid. And he's written a lot about the apartheid and written a lot against it. So we're supposed to understand that this is very much a criticism of the apartheid in South Africa. And so we follow this magistrate who works for this empire and has always worked for it without really questioning anything, without like really, without really thinking of anything, without really ever questioning whether what they were doing was right or anything like that, until he assists. I don't know if assist is the right word, but like he basically sees prisoners of war being tortured by the state, and that's what's gonna make him think about what he's doing, whether what they're doing is right, whether he should be working for this empire, and start questioning a lot of things, especially because of this one barbarian girl who gets this who gets tortured and is disabled as a result of that. And he basically forms like a relationship with this girl. I will say, if there is one thing that I will criticize about this book that I personally wasn't a fan of, it's the relationship between the magistrate and the girl, because I don't I don't quote me on that, but I don't think we ever learn like their actual age, but we are supposed to understand the magistrate is quite a bit older than this girl. And considering some of I don't think there's anything ever physical about them, but some of the descriptions and some of the interactions are a little bit weird when you consider the age difference. So I will say this is very much the only thing that I didn't really like about this book. I feel like the relationship between the magistrate and the little girl, it was quite weird. Like, it didn't need to be handled that way. He didn't need to be to have kind of this sometimes like sexual undertone. It made me quite uncomfortable. I feel like we could have done that. We could have done without that. So that's what the story is about. It's also a story about pacifism in the face of injustice, also about who are barbarians, because we get these people that we never meet that are called barbarians by this empire, but we see those people, the people from the empire, torture anyone that they suspect are barbarians. And so you are led to question, who are the true barbarians? You are torturing people for no reason, just because, like, who have not done anything. These people have not done anything. You are just suspecting them of being traitors and being barbarians, and you torture them. So you can ask the question, who are the true barbarians in this story, right? And yeah, I did really like it. I did really like the writing. Again, it's a book that I don't really hear about quite a lot. Like, I don't see a lot of people talk about this book, mention this book, and I feel like it's kind of a shame, because it's honestly pretty good. So maybe more people should read this. And so I highly encourage you to read it because I do think it's quite good. Then we have a pretty odd book. It's Blackwater by Joyce Carol Oates. This is a novella about this journalist woman who meets a man called the Senator at this lavish party, and she goes away with him in his car, and they have an accident because of the senator's reckless driving. And so the story basically begins with the accident and until the character's death at the end of the book. This is not a spoiler, by the way. This is literally the premise of the book. Like, an accident happens, the journalist is drowning, and so this entire book is her drowning and reminiscing things, having a lot of flashbacks and things like that. Apparently, it's based on a real accident that happened in the 60s, I believe. Apparently, we're supposed to understand that the senator is really like it's a code for Ted Kennedy, and that's like who the character is based on. With this character of the senator, the main theme of the book is basically about like male dominance and power, and how basically it's supposed to be a case study on how women were treated at the time during the 60s and how they really didn't have much power compared to men because of this figure of the senator compared to the journalist and the way he behaves with her and the way he's basically responsible for her death and in a lot more ways than we know at the beginning. This book is quite interesting because it's basically the entire book from the accident onwards is basically like a stream of consciousness from the main character, which is the first time and honestly, I think it's the only time I've ever read a stream of consciousness, and I quite enjoyed it. I think it was very interesting. It was definitely very visual, very there was a lot of imagery around like water, and yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It's quite odd and quite bleak because I mean we know from the very beginning that the character is gonna die. Like, we basically follow her as she's dying and as she's slowly losing her mind because of the fact that she's dying, and it's quite bleak and quite sad. But it's honestly like very very interestingly written, and it packs a punch. It's a quick read, but yeah, it packs a lot of punch. Next, another book that I really love and that I think is also quite underrated is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. This book, I really like this book. I really, really like this book. I feel like if you tend to enjoy Jane Austen novels, you will probably like this because I feel like it's a bit similar in style. So I do feel like if you like Jane Austen, you will probably like this book. So, what is this book about? This book is about this man named Newland Archer, who is an aristocrat in upstate New York during the late 18th century, no, 19th century. He is engaged to this woman, this very well, not prestigious, but she's well regarded in society. She's called May Welland, but everything changes when this other woman named the Countess Olenska comes back to New York after divorcing her husband and having an affair. So she's pretty much not shunned from society, but she definitely has a bad reputation. And so the story is about Newland trying to reconcile whether he should do his duty or whether he should follow his heart because he falls in love with this woman who is not as well regarded in society as the woman that he's currently engaged to. Throughout knowing this woman, he will also just realize a lot of things about himself and about society and kind of how stupid and how arbitrary some of the rules, some of the unspoken rules in society are. I feel like Edith Wharton did a great job, a very clever job, poking fun and making fun and just showing how stupid and silly a lot of the rules are in more aristocratic society. And also this book I feel like is quite feminist in a way, because it really shows, and this is something that also Newland realizes himself, is the very obvious double standard that there is between men and women and the way they are treated in society. For example, Newland had an affair with a married woman. He notices that his behavior is more easily swept under the rug compared to the Countess Olenska, who is very much shamed and shunned for the same thing, for having an affair, despite the fact that her husband was abusive. And so this is one of the things that Newland realizes, and that is one of the main themes also of the book. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was such an interesting look into society of the time, and it was a really great criticism of it, showing how archaic and it doesn't how it doesn't really make sense anymore. Also, I feel like this book is actually quite funny. Edith Wharton has quite a like ironic, biting tone to her sometimes. Kind of similar. It does remind me a bit of Jane Austen's humor, and just the because of the way her characters behave, and like the absurdity of it and the stupidity of it. It just makes for some really comedic scenes, and I feel like in this way it's also very similar to Jane Austen, and that's something that I really enjoyed. And yeah, I really really like this book. I would heavily recommend it. Then we have the classics among classics, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I feel like I don't even need to convince you to read this. From what I understand, it's a book that pretty much everyone in America reads in school, so you've probably already read this. And even if you didn't read it in school, people have talked about this book so much that at this point, like, do I even need to like convince you to read this? I don't think I do. This is a classic for a reason. It is quite short. It's actually very short. It's 120 pages. That's way short. That's actually shorter than I remembered it to be. But yes, it's very short. It's about this man called Gatsby who is very mysterious, and he throws lavish parties in 1920s America, and it's very much about the Roaring Twenties and the whole aesthetic of it. This book is actually very visual, I would say, like very atmospheric in a way. Obviously, this book is mostly about like the death of the American dream, modernism, the Roaring Twenties, social class divide, the idealization of the past, all that kind of stuff. If you still haven't read it, if you somehow still haven't read it, you probably should, because this is again one of the most accessible classic out there. If you are not used to reading classics, you should give it a shot. It's very short, it's very accessible, and it's quite good. I would say it's quite good. My second favorite book on this list is quite a controversial one. You know, people definitely have a lot of opinions on this book, whether they have read it or not. Um, and this book is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Nabokov, sorry. If you somehow don't know what this book is about, this book follows the main character, Humbert Humbert, who is a very sick, disgusting man, for not calling him anything else, who is basically attracted to girls from the ages of, I think, 9 to 14. He calls them nymphet. He has this whole like idea around them that this age is basically like the peak of a girl's life, and that's where they are at their peak of like attractiveness and like personality and everything like that, and it's very very disgusting. And so he meets this young girl who is called Dolores, who he later nicknames Lolita, and he gets obsessed with her. He starts to date her mom to try to get close to her. Her mom dies. He becomes her guardian, and this book basically follows him as he's abusing Dolores, this young girl, and it's very disturbing, and it's very very difficult to read. It is my second favorite book on this list, not because of its entertainment value, because I don't think it's a very entertaining book, but purely because of its literary quality, because I think this book is one of the best books that I've ever read in my life. I think this is one of the best written book I've ever read. It's incredibly written. I think Nabokov, he really did what he set out to do with this story, and it's kind of a shame that it was misconstrued and misunderstood by so many people. And to be fair, I do understand. I can understand why so many people have so many strong opinions about this book, because if you expect the book to very strongly condemn Humbert as a character and his actions, you will probably have some opinions about this book, because it doesn't do that. This book very much trusts, I feel like it trusts its reader to understand what it's doing, and that's why it doesn't try to hold your hand and spoon feed you its message. And I feel like that's maybe I don't know, I don't want to sound condescending or anything, but I really feel like that's maybe like where a lot of the misunderstanding comes from, is people like expect this book to be like very obviously and strongly against its main character, and it doesn't really do that. And I feel like maybe it confuses a lot of people, and some people are like, okay, so if you don't strongly condemn your character, that means that you condone it. And no, the book does not condone what Humbert is doing. It's just telling his story from his point of view, because this is something that you have to remember when you read this book. This is from the point of view of Humbert. We are basically essentially reading letters that he's writing, because the book starts, he's in prison and he's writing his story to publish to the world. So he's very much aware that he has an audience and that what he's writing is being read by people. And this is something that you have to remember when you read the book. You are reading Humbert's account of events. So you cannot trust what he's saying, because not only is he the one telling the story, he's aware that he has an audience. And so obviously he's going to say things, he's going to present situations in a way to maybe make him look less bad. This book is basically the exploration of a sick, twisted man's mind, of a monster, really, who is so awful and so good at manipulating the people around him, the other characters, but also sometimes the reader. And that's also like part of why this book is so effective and why it's so well done. Like I already said, it is very well written. It is fascinating, although very disturbing. And that is why, although this is my second favorite book on this list, I don't know if I would really recommend it to most people, because this is not something that a lot of people are probably going to enjoy. First of all, if you read purely for entertainment, you probably shouldn't read this, because this is not going to do it for you in terms of entertainment, because this is not entertaining. This is very heavy and disturbing. I do think it's kind of a shame that it was misconstrued and misunderstood to this point, to the point where a whole aesthetic was created around like the Lolita thing. That's a whole other topic of discussion. And honestly, I think that the main reason that whole thing with society happened is mainly because of the movies. And I have quite strong opinions about the adaptations of this book, and actually kind of want to make a video like solely dedicated to this book, and like talking about just its effect on society, and kind of talk about what its actual purpose was, what its actual message was, and what the author's intention actually was writing this book. And I kind of want to make a video about that. I don't know, tell me if that's something that you would like to watch. I would have to, it wouldn't be something that I would do right away, because I would like to read it again, to talk about it in a better way, in a more, with a fresh mind, because it's been quite a while since I've read it. But yeah, tell me if you would like to see me talk more about this book. I don't know. Tell me. And finally, the best book that I read for my degree, in my opinion, my favorite book that I read and I studied, is, I think, a pretty underrated book. Again, I think I've only seen one other person talk about this book, and this is such a shame because it's such a good book. It's Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This book is so good. I feel like I'm gonna struggle to talk about this book because I always struggle to talk about things that I love because I never quite know how to explain why I love something. First of all, this book is about this man who remains nameless for the entirety of the novel. We don't know what he's named. He's an African American man who lives in the south of the US during the 50s. He's a college student and he starts the story, he's quite disconnected from his roots, his people, his origins. And so we basically follow him on a journey of self-discovery, of multitudes of people of like many different origins, but mostly people from his own origin, like other African Americans are gonna teach him a lot about himself and about um, his community. It's just such a good coming of age, even though technically I know that coming of ages are like for characters that are much younger, and we basically follow them through like childhood and adulthood and them growing up. But even though the main character starts off as a college man, so like a young adult, the way he starts off is so innocent that I feel like you could still call this a coming of age, because you definitely still see him like coming into himself and just get opinions on things and learn about the world, learn about other people. And it's such, I don't know how to explain it. It's so good. It's not the shortest book. It's over 500 pages, I think. Yeah, it's over 500 pages, but it's very accessible. I would say the writing is very good, and I would say it's very accessible. It's not tedious or difficult to read. It's not boring. There are a lot of things going on. There are a lot of people that you meet. It's very much a character study. If you are like me and if you are mostly a character based reader, I feel like you would definitely like this book, because this is basically a book about this main character. And also, it has what is, I think, my favorite introducing paragraph that I've ever read in any book ever. If I can find it so that I can read it to you. Yes. So it goes like this: I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who wanted Edgar Allan Poe. Nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I'm invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me, like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows. It is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. Do I even need to say anything more? Like, it's so good. It's the I don't even know what to say. Like, it's so good. It introduces like the main themes of the book so perfectly. It's so well written. I'm in love with it. I love this book. And I probably wrote my favorite essay that I've ever written on this book. And I just love it so much. Please, if you need to read any of the books that I presented to you, please make it this one. And so that concludes this video. These were all of the books that I read for my degree when I studied English in university. I hope you liked this video. I hope you found it entertaining or interesting or anything like that. Tell me if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, if you're planning to read any of them. And yeah, thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.